Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about empathy alone. It was about why empaths leave without warning and never return, and what this sudden vanishing reveals about the hidden psychological mechanisms that most people never understand. In his research on psychological types, Jung documented what I call empathic departure syndrome, a pattern where highly sensitive individuals with dominant introverted intuition would endure toxic relationships for months or years, showing infinite patience and accommodation, then disappear completely without explanation or possibility of return. Jung called this phenomenon dangerous because these empaths possessed what he described as unconscious boundary systems that operated below conscious awareness. Their introverted intuition would detect relationship toxicity and emotional manipulation long before their conscious mind could process it, creating what Jung termed a silent psychological emergency that built pressure until sudden departure became inevitable. What made this discovery so disturbing to Jung was the finality. These weren't temporary withdrawals or dramatic exits designed to get attention. These empaths would vanish into complete silence and never return, leaving behind bewildered partners, friends, and family members who genuinely believed everything was fine. Today I'll reveal Jung's insights about why empaths leave without warning and never return, and why he believed this wasn't cruelty or abandonment, but what I call unconscious self-rescue, the psyche's emergency intervention when conscious boundaries have completely failed. Jung's breakthrough came through observing a patient he described as having extraordinary sensitivity to others' emotional states. This individual would absorb criticism, manipulation, and emotional demands for months, while their dreams showed increasingly desperate warning signs: drowning in muddy water, being trapped in burning buildings, carrying impossibly heavy stones. Then something unprecedented happened. Without any apparent trigger, no argument, no dramatic confrontation, the patient simply vanished from a long-term relationship. Complete silence, no explanation, no gradual withdrawal. Jung was baffled. This contradicted everything he knew about human behavior patterns. When he investigated further, Jung discovered the patient's unconscious had been tracking relationship toxicity through introverted intuition for 6 months before departure. Their nervous system had been registering emotional abuse, while their conscious mind rationalized it away. The sudden disappearance wasn't impulsive. It was what Jung called psychic emergency surgery. Jung wrote, "The unconscious intervened when consciousness failed to protect the individual from psychological annihilation." This case revealed that some people possess internal warning systems so sophisticated they can predict relationship failure months in advance, yet their conscious mind remains unable to act until the unconscious takes control completely. This wasn't an isolated incident. Jung began documenting similar patterns across multiple patients, leading to his theory of what I call empathic overwhelm, a condition where sensitivity becomes a liability without proper psychological boundaries. Jung discovered that highly sensitive individuals possess what I call intuitive toxicity detection. Their dominant introverted intuition function continuously scans relationships for emotional inconsistencies, manipulation tactics, and psychological red flags operating far below conscious awareness. Here's what Jung found. These individuals unconsciously process thousands of microsignals, tone changes, facial expressions, energy shifts, behavioral inconsistencies, that their conscious mind dismisses as paranoia. Their knee function creates detailed psychological maps of relationship dynamics, while their feeling function compels them to ignore these insights. Jung documented 3 phases of this unconscious warning system. Phase 1, silent alarm. The intuitive function begins detecting manipulation or emotional abuse, but the conscious mind rationalizes it away. Dreams become increasingly chaotic and urgent. Phase 2, psychological pressure. The unconscious builds what Jung called departure energy, a compulsive need to escape that grows stronger while the conscious mind maintains accommodation patterns. Phase 3. Emergency override. The unconscious mind activates what Jung termed survival protocols, forcing sudden departure to prevent complete psychological collapse. Jung realized this system explained why these departures seem so sudden to others. The empath's conscious behavior remained accommodating right up until the moment of departure, masking months of unconscious distress. Jung identified a psychological trap that makes departure without warning almost inevitable for many empaths. When their intuition detects relationship toxicity, instead of acting on this information, they unconsciously increase their accommodation behavior. Jung called this inverse boundary response. The more threatened they feel unconsciously, the more giving they become consciously. This creates what Jung observed as false relationship security, where toxic behavior escalates because the empath's increased accommodation signals infinite tolerance. The devastating result: others genuinely believe everything is perfect, while the empath's psychological foundation crumbles invisibly. Jung documented cases where people were completely shocked by departures because the empath had been more attentive and giving than ever in the weeks before disappearing. Jung identified the cruel irony. Their compassion became their prison. Their empathy enabled the very behavior that ultimately destroyed the relationship. The more they tried to heal others through accommodation, the more permission they gave for toxic behavior to continue. This pattern explains why explanations are often impossible after departure. How do you explain months of invisible psychological damage to someone who never saw it happening? Jung noted that attempts to explain often led to gaslighting or manipulation, making silence the only protective option. Jung categorized 4 distinct ways empaths vanish, each representing different levels of psychological awareness. The phantom vanish, complete disappearance without any warning signs visible to others. These empaths have mastered unconscious accommodation so thoroughly that their distress remains completely hidden. They simply stop responding to all communication permanently. Jung observed this in individuals whose feeling function completely suppressed their intuitive warnings until unconscious intervention became necessary. The gradual fade. These empaths begin showing subtle signs of withdrawal, shorter conversations, delayed responses, less emotional availability, but never explain why. They slowly reduce contact until communication stops entirely. Jung noted this pattern in those whose unconscious was gradually overriding their conscious accommodation drive. The boundary explosion, a sudden shift from endless patience to rigid boundaries, often triggered by one seemingly minor incident that represents months of accumulated violations. They don't leave immediately, but become completely unavailable emotionally. When these boundaries are inevitably tested or violated, permanent departure follows without discussion. The silent protection. These empaths recognize the pattern consciously and leave strategically, often during times when their absence will cause minimal disruption. They may leave notes or messages explaining their general need for space, but provide no specific details that could be used for manipulation. Jung found that all 4 patterns shared one crucial element: the complete absence of negotiation or explanation post-departure. Unlike normal relationship conflicts, these endings offered no opportunity for discussion or reconciliation. Jung's most startling discovery was why these empaths never return. It's not choice, but psychological impossibility. Once the unconscious mind executes what Jung called protective departure, attempting to return creates what he observed as severe psychological distress. Jung documented that empaths who tried to return experienced panic attacks, depression, and what I call psychic recoil. Their nervous system actively rejected re-engagement with the relationship. Their unconscious had classified the relationship as psychologically lethal and would not permit re-exposure. Jung identified 3 barriers to return: unconscious protection protocols, the same psychological mechanism that forced departure actively prevents return. Jung observed this as an evolutionary survival mechanism. Once the psyche identifies a threat to psychological survival, it maintains permanent vigilance against re-exposure. Transformation. During absence, Jung found that empaths undergo rapid psychological changes during separation. Their unconscious uses the space to restore depleted emotional resources and develop stronger boundary recognition. Returning would require abandoning this psychological growth. Reality recognition. Away from the relationship, empaths often experience what Jung called clarity restoration. They begin seeing manipulation patterns that were invisible while accommodating. This new awareness makes returning feel like conscious self-harm. Jung concluded that these departures represent what he called psychological molting. The individual must shed their old identity as unlimited accommodator to survive psychologically. Return would mean climbing back into a discarded skin that no longer fits. Jung developed specific techniques to help empaths recognize unconscious warnings before reaching departure crisis points. Intuitive signal recognition. Jung taught empaths to track correlation between their dreams, physical sensations, and relationship dynamics. When anxiety, exhaustion, or chaotic dreams increase around specific people, this indicates unconscious toxicity detection. Instead of dismissing these signals, Jung encouraged documenting patterns to develop conscious awareness of unconscious warnings. Boundary testing protocols. Rather than waiting for crisis, Jung advocated for deliberate boundary experiments. Express one small limit and observe the response. Healthy people respect boundaries. Toxic people violate them. This provides early relationship assessment without requiring major confrontation. Energy tracking systems. Jung instructed empaths to monitor their energy levels before and after interactions. Consistent energy drain from specific relationships indicates psychological toxicity, even when conscious interaction feels positive. This creates objective measurement of relationship health. Communication frameworks. Jung developed scripts for expressing limits without extensive justification. I've noticed I need more space, rather than detailed explanations that invite manipulation. The key insight: boundaries are statements of intention, not requests for permission. Departure decision criteria. Jung established clear indicators for when departure becomes necessary. Repeated boundary violations after clear communication. Escalating manipulation when limits are expressed. Refusal to acknowledge impact of harmful behavior, and attempts to use empathy against the empath. These techniques transform unconscious departure into conscious choice, eliminating the trauma of sudden vanishing while maintaining psychological protection. Jung analyzed historical figures who demonstrated both successful boundary integration and empathic departure patterns. Virginia Woolf. Jung would have recognized Woolf's sensitivity and her struggles with what he called empathic overwhelm. Her letters reveal patterns of absorbing others' emotional states while losing connection to her own needs. Her ultimate departure from life itself represents the extreme end of what happens when sensitive individuals cannot develop protective boundaries. Maya Angelou. Angelou's autobiography reveals multiple instances of sudden departure from toxic relationships and situations. Jung would have identified her famous quote, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time," as integrated intuitive wisdom, trusting initial unconscious impressions rather than waiting for conscious proof. Carl Rogers. Despite his therapeutic empathy, Rogers maintained strict professional boundaries. Jung observed that Rogers understood empathy required protection. Unlimited emotional availability destroys both helper and helped. His success came from conscious boundary management rather than unconscious accommodation. Eleanor Roosevelt. Roosevelt's transformation from accommodating wife to independent leader demonstrates successful empathic integration. She learned to channel sensitivity towards social justice rather than personal accommodation, finding outlets for empathy that didn't require self-destruction. The pattern Jung identified: successful empaths learn to trust their intuitive warnings and act on them consciously, while those who remained trapped in accommodation patterns either departed unconsciously or suffered psychological breakdown. Jung recognized that empaths need relationships with people who understand sensitivity as strength rather than liability. Recognition. Signals for safe people. Jung identified specific traits. They respect no without requiring extensive justification. They manage their own emotions rather than expecting others to do it for them. They appreciate empathy without exploiting it. And they demonstrate what Jung called reciprocal consideration, thinking about how their behavior affects others. The mutual empathy principle. Jung observed that healthy relationships for empaths require both people to consider each other's emotional well-being. One-sided emotional labor inevitably leads to accommodation patterns and eventual departure. Community-building strategies. Jung recommended seeking environments where sensitivity is valued, creative communities where emotional intelligence serves artistic expression, therapeutic or helping professions where empathy has clear boundaries and purpose, spiritual communities focused on consciousness development rather than emotional dependency, and what Jung called growth partnerships, where both people commit to honest communication and mutual respect. Avoiding empathic predators. Jung warned about individuals who specifically target empaths, those who share dramatic personal stories quickly to trigger rescue responses, people who consistently violate small boundaries while apologizing profusely, individuals who alternate between excessive appreciation and subtle criticism, and those who react with anger or manipulation when boundaries are expressed. Jung emphasized that empaths must learn to see accommodation addiction as clearly as any other dependency. It serves the ego's need to feel needed while destroying authentic connection. Jung documented that empaths who successfully integrate their sensitivity without losing it follow predictable development stages. Stage 1. Recognition crisis, usually triggered by a particularly painful relationship loss, where they realize accommodation didn't prevent abandonment, but enabled mistreatment. The breakthrough comes when they understand their sensitivity is valuable and deserves protection. Stage 2. Boundary experimentation, learning to set small limits and observe responses. This stage involves considerable guilt and fear of being selfish, but also the liberating discovery that healthy people respect boundaries while toxic people reveal themselves through violations. Stage 3. Intuitive integration, developing trust in unconscious warning signals rather than dismissing them as overthinking. This includes learning to distinguish between anxiety and genuine intuitive warnings about people or situations. Stage 4. Conscious choice, reaching the ability to choose emotional investments wisely rather than giving indiscriminately. They become what Jung called consciously empathic, sensitive by choice rather than compulsion. Stage 5. Empathic mastery. The final integration where sensitivity becomes a gift, shared selectively rather than a wound that attracts predators. They can love deeply while maintaining clear boundaries, creating the extraordinary relationships they always desired. Jung noted that fully integrated empaths rarely need to leave relationships suddenly because they address issues early and only invest in people who demonstrate mutual respect. If you've learned to trust your inner warnings before reaching your breaking point, comment, "I honor the whispers so I don't have to hear the screams." Jung identified specific traps that prevent successful empathic development. The overcorrection trap, swinging from over-accommodation to complete emotional unavailability. Jung observed, this prevents the genuine connections empaths actually need for psychological health. The guilt manipulation spiral. When empaths begin setting boundaries, toxic individuals often escalate manipulation tactics, using the empath's compassion against them. Jung emphasized that how someone responds to boundaries reveals their true character. This is information, not something to fix. The explanation addiction, believing boundaries require extensive justification or other people's agreement to be valid. Jung noted that over-explaining invites manipulation and debate. Boundaries are personal decisions, not group negotiations. The isolation overreaction, withdrawing from all connection rather than learning to discern between healthy and unhealthy people. Jung warned this prevents the meaningful relationships empaths need for psychological thriving. Jung's maintenance practices included regular solitude for emotional processing, creative expression for channeling sensitivity, relationships with other emotionally mature individuals, and what I call boundary practice, consistently maintaining small limits to build confidence for larger ones. Jung believed empaths who learn conscious boundaries serve a crucial evolutionary function in human psychological development. When sensitive people demonstrate that deep connection requires mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice, they model healthier relationship dynamics for everyone around them. Jung observed that unconscious empathic departure, while necessary for individual survival, also serves what he called collective teaching function. It forces those left behind to confront their own emotional dependency and parasitic relationship patterns. Jung noted, the empath's sudden absence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the other person's capacity for genuine care versus mere consumption of empathic resources. This teaching function operates through what Jung identified as absence education. People learn about healthy relationship dynamics through loss rather than explanation. When someone who provided endless emotional support suddenly disappears, it reveals the one-sided nature of the relationship in ways that words never could. Jung documented that empathic departures often trigger what he called relationship awakening in those left behind. Some people recognize their exploitative patterns and begin developing genuine empathy and reciprocity. Others reveal their true nature by becoming angry at losing their empathic resource rather than concerned about the departed person's well-being. Cultural empathy modeling. Jung saw integrated empaths as relationship pioneers, demonstrating that true intimacy comes from conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. He believed that as empaths learn healthy boundary management, they create what he called empathy exemplars, living examples of how sensitivity and strength can coexist. These individuals show others that empathy doesn't require self-destruction, that caring doesn't mean endless accommodation, and that healthy love includes self-protection. Jung observed that when empaths maintain boundaries while remaining warm and caring, they give others permission to do the same. Jung noted that empathic modeling has particular impact on children and young adults who are developing their own relationship patterns. When they observe empaths setting healthy boundaries while maintaining loving connections, they learn that sensitivity and self-respect are compatible rather than contradictory. Collective emotional intelligence development. Jung believed that humanity's emotional evolution depends partly on individuals who can feel deeply while thinking clearly about relationship dynamics. He saw empaths as what I call emotional intelligence pioneers, people who develop sophisticated understanding of psychological patterns and teach others through example. Jung observed that empaths who have integrated their sensitivity often become natural counselors, mediators, or healers, not because they sacrifice themselves for others, but because they understand both emotional depth and psychological protection. Their combination of empathy and boundaries makes them uniquely qualified to help others navigate relationship challenges. He noted that integrated empaths often find their life purpose involves helping others escape toxic relationships or develop emotional intelligence. Their own journey from unconscious accommodation to conscious boundaries becomes a roadmap for others walking similar paths. Social system transformation. Jung recognized that cultural change often begins with individuals who refuse to participate in dysfunctional patterns. When empaths stop enabling toxic behavior through endless accommodation, they force social systems to evolve or reveal their true nature. Jung documented how empathic boundary setting creates what he called authenticity pressure in social groups. When the most accommodating member begins setting limits, others must either develop genuine empathy or find new sources of emotional exploitation. This pressure often leads to healthier group dynamics or reveals which relationships were based on exploitation rather than mutual care. Jung observed that workplaces, families, and communities with integrated empaths often develop higher standards for emotional intelligence and mutual respect. The empath's refusal to tolerate poor treatment raises the bar for everyone's behavior. Evolutionary perspective. Jung concluded that the empath's journey from unconscious accommodation to conscious boundaries represents humanity's evolution toward more emotionally intelligent relationships. He saw this transformation as essential for creating cultures based on mutual respect rather than exploitation of sensitivity. Jung believed that as more empaths learn healthy boundary management, they create what he called empathy tipping points, cultural shifts where emotional intelligence becomes valued and protected rather than exploited. He envisioned societies where sensitivity is recognized as psychological sophistication rather than vulnerability to be exploited. He saw integrated empaths as bridges between humanity's current emotional immaturity and its potential for conscious, respectful connection. Their journey demonstrates that evolution from unconscious accommodation to conscious choice is possible, inspiring others to develop their own emotional intelligence and boundary skills. The empath who leaves without warning and never returns isn't cruel. They're following an unconscious survival mechanism when conscious boundaries have failed completely. Jung's research reveals this pattern as psychological emergency intervention, not personal failure. But there's another path. When you learn to recognize your unconscious warning signals and trust them, when you develop the courage to set boundaries before reaching crisis points, you transform from an unconscious victim of your own empathy into a conscious creator of healthy relationships. Your sensitivity isn't your curse, it's your superpower. But like any powerful ability, it requires wisdom in application. Jung showed that the same psychological makeup that makes you vulnerable to exploitation also makes you capable of extraordinary love and connection when properly protected. The choice is yours. Remain trapped in cycles of accommodation, followed by sudden departure, or develop the conscious boundaries that allow your empathy to flourish in relationships built on mutual respect. If you've ever left without warning and never returned, comment, "I choose conscious boundaries." Your journey from unconscious escape to conscious choice isn't just personal healing, it's pioneering a healthier way of loving for everyone. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.